Please, don't give up. Hang on. We are almost there. Please, don't die yet.
What if the worst decision of your life turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to you? A poor single dad missed his life-changing interview to save an old lady dying on the sidewalk, completely unaware that she was his millionaire CEO's mother. The choice he made in those 30 seconds didn't just change one life, it rewrote the destiny of 3 families forever. Before we continue, please tell us, where in the world are you tuning in from? We love seeing how far our stories travel. The dress shoes weren't made for running, especially not while carrying a 75-year-old woman on your back through downtown Springfield. But Ethan Powell wasn't thinking about his shoes, or his borrowed tie that whiffed behind him like a flag of surrender, or even the fact that his entire future was slipping away with every desperate step he took toward Oregon Medical Center. All he could hear was the woman's labored breathing against his ear, rattling and wheezing like air through a broken pipe. 3 more blocks, he gasped, his legs burning as he adjusted her weight on his shoulders. Just hold on. Please, just hold on.
9:16 a.m. The digital clock on the bank building seemed to mock him as he ran past. His interview at Horizon Innovations was in 14 minutes, 6 blocks away in the opposite direction. He'd never make it now. A businessman stepped aside as Ethan barreled past, nearly dropping his coffee. What the hell? But Ethan was already gone, his mind split between the dying woman on his back and the dying opportunity he was leaving behind. 7 months. 7 months without steady work, and this interview was supposed to fix everything. The logistics coordinator position at Horizon Innovations paid $68,000 a year with benefits, real health insurance, stability, a chance to give Abby the life she deserved. The woman's fingers clutched weakly at his shirt collar, and he felt her body starting to go limp. No, he muttered, pushing his legs harder. Stay with me, we're almost there. 2 blocks now. His lungs screamed for air, matching the desperate gasps of the woman he carried. Through his exhaustion, fragments of the morning flashed through his mind. Abby's excited face when she saw him in his borrowed tie, the way she'd asked if today was special, her hopeful question about the museum trip they couldn't afford. Will we be able to go to the museum, Dad? Yes, sweetheart. After today, everything's going to be okay. Jeez, what had he done?
The emergency room doors exploded open as Ethan burst through, his voice cracking with desperation. Help! She can't breathe! Asthma attack! The medical staff moved like a well-oiled machine, lifting the woman from his back onto a gurney. Someone was asking him questions. Her name, what happened, was he family? But the words blurred together as Ethan collapsed against the wall, his dress shirt soaked with sweat, his body shaking from exertion. Sir, are you all right? A nurse was touching his shoulder, but Ethan could only stare at the clock on the wall. 9:19 a.m. It was over. I need to make a phone call, he said, his voice hollow. The nurse pointed him toward a bank of payphones down the corridor. Each step felt heavier than the 3 blocks he'd just run. His fingers trembled as he dialed the number he'd memorized, the number that was supposed to change everything. Horizon Innovations, Human Resources, how may I direct your call? This is Ethan Powell. I have an interview scheduled for 9:30 with Ms. Martinez. I've had an emergency. Mr. Powell? The receptionist's voice was professionally sympathetic but firm. I'm sorry, but Ms. Martinez has a very tight schedule today. The position has multiple candidates interviewing, and we can't accommodate rescheduling. If you're unable to make your appointed time... I understand, Ethan said quietly, though understanding and accepting were vastly different things. He hung up the phone and stood there in the fluorescent hospital corridor, still wearing the tie he'd borrowed from his neighbor, still in the shoes he'd polished 3 times last night, still carrying the weight of promises he'd made to his daughter that morning. Promises he couldn't keep. The woman, he didn't even know her name, was going to be fine. The doctor confirmed it 20 minutes later. They had administered emergency medication, stabilized her breathing, and admitted her for observation. She'd survive because he had acted fast. You saved her life, the doctor said, clapping him on the shoulder. Another few minutes and we might have been looking at brain damage from oxygen deprivation. You did a good thing. a good thing. Ethan nodded, unable to explain that good things didn't pay rent. Good things didn't buy new shoes for 8-year-olds who pretended not to notice the holes in their current pair. Good things didn't keep the lights on or put food in the refrigerator or stop eviction notices from appearing under the door. The bus ride home took 43 minutes, and every second was torture. He sat by the window, watching the city pass by, seeing his reflection in the glass. A man in rumpled interview clothes who'd just thrown away his family's last chance at stability. Why? Why had he stopped? He knew why. The moment he'd seen that woman gasping for air on the sidewalk, surrounded by a crowd of people filming her instead of helping, he'd seen Rachel, his wife.
3 years ago, on a hiking trail, fighting for breath while her empty inhaler lay useless in her pocket, she died alone, miles from help, gasping for air that wouldn't come. The doctor said it had taken less than 15 minutes. 15 minutes of terror, knowing what was happening, unable to stop it. When Ethan had seen those same desperate eyes this morning, that same primal fight for oxygen, he couldn't walk past, even knowing what it would cost him, even knowing Abby would pay the price for his conscience. The apartment felt smaller when he opened the door, as if the walls had moved closer while he was gone. The eviction notice he'd hidden in the kitchen drawers seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. 15 days, that's what the landlord had given him. 15 days to come up with 2 months' back rent or get out. He'd been so sure today would fix everything. He'd practiced for this interview for 2 weeks, researching Horizon Innovations until he could recite their supply chain statistics in his sleep. He'd spent his last $7 getting his one good shirt dry cleaned. He'd even done a practice run to the building yesterday, timing everything perfectly. Perfect plans, perfectly destroyed. Ethan sat at the kitchen table and pulled out his phone, the prepaid one with barely any minutes left. He needed to call the credit union about the overdue loan payment, but what would he say? That he had a job lined up but chose to save a stranger instead? That his conscience was more important than his credit score? The phone rang before he could dial. Unknown number. Mr. Powell, this is St. Mary's Elementary. Abby's teacher wanted me to call. There's a field trip permission slip that needs to be turned in by tomorrow. It's $25 for the Science Museum. His throat closed. I'll have to get back to you. He hung up and put his head in his hands.
Have you ever stood at the crossroads of doing what's right and doing what's necessary? When being a good person means failing the people who depend on you? Ethan had 27 minutes to make that interview, 27 minutes to secure his daughter's future, and he'd thrown it all away for someone he'd never met. But here's the thing about choices made from the heart. Sometimes the universe has different plans than the ones we make. 2 weeks passed like water through clenched fists, desperate, unstoppable, and leaving nothing behind but the memory of what had slipped away. The credit union called twice daily until Ethan stopped answering altogether. Each ring was another reminder of the $3,000 loan he'd taken 6 months ago when the car had broken down and he'd needed it for gig work. Now the interest was compounding, the threats escalating, and he had nothing to offer but apologies they didn't want to hear. Abby had stopped mentioning the museum. She'd stopped mentioning a lot of things. The art supplies her class needed, the birthday party she'd been invited to next week, the fact that her jeans were getting too short. She'd developed this quiet way of making herself smaller, needing less, asking for nothing. 8 years old and already learning to live with disappointment. It broke something in Ethan that felt irreparable. "Dad, I'm not really hungry," she said on the 10th night, pushing her plate toward him. They were sharing a box of macaroni and cheese, the last one in the cupboard. "You need to eat, sweetheart." "I had a big lunch at school," she lied, and they both knew it was a lie. But what could he say? That he was failing her? That her father had chosen a stranger's life over their security?
That night, after Abby was asleep, Ethan sat in the dark kitchen doing math that wouldn't add up no matter how many times he ran the numbers. $62 in his checking account. 3 days until eviction. No callbacks from the 17 jobs he'd applied to. No family to turn to. his parents gone, Rachel's parents distant since their daughter's death. He'd saved a life 2 weeks ago. Tonight, he couldn't even save his daughter from hunger. Ms. Wilson from next door knocked on day 12, holding a casserole dish that smelled like heaven. Made too much, she said kindly, not meeting his eyes. Thought Abby might enjoy it. Ethan's pride wanted to refuse, but Abby's needs won. Thank you, he managed, his voice rough. We all need help sometimes, Mr. Powell. It's not weakness, it's human. The casserole fed them for 3 days. 3 days of Ethan telling himself he'd figure something out, find a miracle, make it work somehow. But miracles, he'd learned, were for people who could afford to wait for them. On the 14th day, at 4:30 p.m., someone knocked on the door. Ethan's heart seized. The eviction wasn't supposed to be enforced until tomorrow, but maybe the landlord had decided to move early. He looked around the apartment, at Abby's drawings on the refrigerator, at the photos of Rachel he'd kept on the bookshelf, at the small life they'd built and were about to lose. Abby, stay in your room for a minute, okay? Okay, Dad. He opened the door, prepared for the worst. But it wasn't the sheriff. It wasn't the landlord.
It was a woman in an expensive beige suit, with blonde hair pulled back and eyes that seemed to see straight through him. Ethan Powell? Yes? His voice was cautious, defensive. My name is Claire Donovan. I've been looking for you for 2 weeks. She paused, studying his face. May I come in? I promise I'm not here about debts or evictions. Actually, I'm here about what happened on Harrison Street, with the elderly woman having an asthma attack. Ethan's breath caught. Did something happen? Is she okay? She's fine, thanks to you. Claire's expression softened slightly. That woman was my mother. The words hung in the air between them, rearranging everything Ethan thought he knew about that morning. Your mother? He stepped aside numbly, letting her in. Claire sat on their worn couch, her designer suit a stark contrast to the threadbare furniture, but she didn't seem to notice or care, her focus entirely on Ethan. My mother, Eleanor Donovan, told me everything. How she'd forgotten her inhaler that morning, how her airways started closing on the sidewalk, how people stood around filming instead of helping. Her voice caught slightly. And how one man, you, picked her up and ran 3 blocks to the hospital. Anyone would have. No, they wouldn't have. They didn't. 30 people stood there watching my mother die, and only you acted. The doctor said 5 more minutes and she would have suffered permanent brain damage. 10 minutes and she would have died. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. It took me a week to find you. The hospital wouldn't release your information, and you'd left before my mother could get your name. I had to go through security footage from 3 different businesses, track down witnesses, piece together who you were. Why? Ethan asked quietly. Why go to all that trouble? Claire pulled out a piece of paper from the folder and handed it to him. It was a check. $50,000. Ethan's name on the pay line. Because you saved the most important person in my world. Ethan stared at the check, his mind unable to process the number. I can't. This is too much. I can't accept this. Mr. Powell, Ethan, do you know what my mother means to me? My father died 5 years ago. She's all I have. $50,000? I would have paid 10 times that to have her alive and well. But I didn't do it for money. I didn't even know who she was. That's exactly why you deserve this, Claire said. You helped her when there was nothing in it for you, when it cost you everything. She paused, seeming to gather herself for something more. When I was searching for you, I did a background check. I learned about your situation, your daughter, your late wife, your current circumstances, and I learned something particularly interesting. Ethan waited, his heart pounding. You had an interview scheduled that morning at 9:30 a.m. at Horizon Innovations. The words hit him like a physical blow.
He nodded, unable to speak. Claire leaned forward slightly. "Ethan, I'm the CEO of Horizon Innovations." The room seemed to tilt. Ethan gripped the arm of his chair, trying to process what she just said. But that means, it means you missed your interview at my company because you were saving my mother's life. The irony hasn't escaped me. You gave up a chance at a job with us to save someone you didn't even know was connected to that very opportunity. The universe has a twisted sense of humor, or a perfect sense of timing, Claire countered. I looked at your application after I found out. You're overqualified for that coordinator position. Your experience, your background, you should be doing more than managing logistics.
She pulled out another paper from her folder. Which is why I'm offering you a different position, Director of Community Outreach. It's a new role I've been meaning to create, someone to head our corporate responsibility initiatives, work with local communities, develop programs that actually make a difference. The salary is $90,000 a year, full benefits including comprehensive health coverage, and if you're interested, you can start Monday. Ethan couldn't breathe. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to people like him. Why? He managed to ask. The check is already more than generous. Why the job, too? Claire's expression grew thoughtful. Because when my mother was dying on that sidewalk, you didn't see a stranger. You saw a human being who needed help. That's the kind of person I want in my organization. That's the kind of values I want representing my company. Dad? Abby's small voice came from the hallway. Is everything okay? Ethan looked at Claire, who nodded encouragingly. Come here, sweetheart. Abby patted over in her socked feet, eyeing Claire curiously, but not fearfully. Even in worn clothes, his daughter had a dignity about her, a grace that reminded him painfully of Rachel. Abby, this is Ms. Donovan. She came to talk to me about a job. A job? Abby's eyes widened hopefully. Claire smiled warmly at the little girl. Your dad did something very brave 2 weeks ago. He saved someone's life. And now I'd like to offer him a position at my company, if that's okay with you. Abby looked between them, processing this with 8-year-old wisdom. Does this mean we can go to the museum? Yes, Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. We can go to the museum and get new shoes and... He looked at the check in his hand, then at Claire's patient, kind face. And things are going to be okay.
What would you do if your worst moment became your miracle? If the choice that seemed to destroy everything actually built something better? Claire stayed for another hour, going over the details of the position, the benefits package, the start date. Abby sat beside her father, occasionally interjecting with questions that made Claire laugh. Real, genuine laughter that filled their small apartment with something it had been missing for too long. Hope. Your daughter's brilliant, Claire said as she prepared to leave. The way she thinks, the questions she asks, she's special. She gets it from her mother, Ethan said softly. Claire paused at the door. I know this is a lot to process, and I know accepting help isn't easy. I can see it in your face. But Ethan, you've been carrying everything alone for too long. Let someone help carry the load. After she left, Ethan sat with Abby on the couch, holding the check that would solve their immediate problems and the job offer that would secure their future. Dad, are you crying? Abby asked, reaching up to touch his cheek. Happy tears, baby. These are happy tears. Because of the lady? Because of a lot of things. He pulled her close. Remember when I said everything was going to be okay? I was wrong. Everything's going to be better than okay. That night, for the first time in 3 years, Ethan slept without anxiety clawing at his chest. The eviction notice no longer mattered. The credit union would be paid. Abby would have everything she needed and more. But beyond the financial relief, something else had shifted. The guilt he'd carried since Rachel's death, the weight of not being there, not being able to save her, had lifted slightly. He'd saved someone. When it mattered, when it cost him everything, he'd chosen to act. Maybe he couldn't save Rachel, but he'd saved Eleanor. And in the strange arithmetic of the universe, that had saved him too. 6 months later, Ethan stood in his office at Horizon Innovations, looking out at downtown Springfield. His life had transformed so completely that sometimes he had to pinch himself to believe it was real. The job was everything Claire had promised and more. He'd thrown himself into it with passion, developing programs that helped single parents find employment, creating partnerships with local schools, establishing emergency funds for families in crisis. Every initiative felt personal because he'd lived it. He knew what it was like to be one paycheck from disaster, one emergency from ruin. Abby had bloomed like a flower finally given sunlight. New clothes, new shoes, the museum trip she dreamed about. But more than that, she had stability, security. She could be a kid again, instead of a tiny adult trying not to be a burden. They'd moved into a 3-bedroom apartment in a better school district. Abby had her own room, decorated in the purple and silver she'd always wanted. She joined the art club, the science club, and had friends over for sleepovers, luxuries that had been impossible before. But the biggest change, the one Ethan hadn't expected, was Claire. She'd started dropping by his office to discuss the community programs, but their conversations gradually shifted from professional to personal. She'd ask about Abby's school projects, share stories about Eleanor's recovery, talk about the challenges of running a company so young. "I inherited the company when I was 28. My father dropped dead of a heart attack in this very building. One day, I was a marketing manager. The next, I was CEO of a company with 800 employees. I've been faking confidence for 5 years. "You're not faking anything," he'd replied. "You're one of the most capable people I've ever met." "So are you," she'd said softly. "You just haven't had the chance to show it until now." Their first real date, if you could call it that, was at Abby's school play months after Ethan started at Horizon. Claire had mentioned wanting to see it, and Ethan had invited her without thinking. She'd shown up in jeans and a sweater instead of her usual suits, looking younger and more relaxed than he'd ever seen her. Abby had beamed when she saw Claire in the audience, waving enthusiastically from the stage before her teacher gently redirected her attention. After the play, Abby had dragged Claire around, introducing her to all her friends as "my dad's boss who's really nice and smells like flowers."
Flowers? Claire had laughed. Really expensive flowers, Abby had clarified, seriously, making Claire laugh even harder. Eleanor had started joining them for Sunday dinners once she'd fully recovered. The elderly woman was nothing like Ethan had expected. Sharp, funny, and endlessly grateful in a way that made him uncomfortable. "You carried me 3 blocks, she'd say every time, shaking her head in amazement. "In dress shoes? Do you know how uncomfortable that must have been?" "Mom, you've told that story 100 times, Claire would protest, "and I'll tell it 100 more. This man saved my life. I'm allowed to be repetitive about it." Eleanor had taken to Abby immediately, teaching her card games, helping with homework, filling the grandmother role that had been empty since Rachel's parents had retreated into their grief. "She's going to be trouble when she's older," Eleanor would say fondly, watching Abby negotiate for extra dessert. "The good kind of trouble, the kind that changes things." Have you ever watched your life rebuild itself into something you never dared imagine? That's what those 6 months felt like for Ethan, like watching a photo develop slowly, revealing an image more beautiful than anything he could have planned. The relationship with Claire evolved naturally, without grand declarations or dramatic moments. She'd become part of their routine: Tuesday lunches, Thursday evening walks, weekend adventures with Abby. She fit into their life like she'd always belonged there, filling spaces Ethan hadn't even realized were empty. "I'm falling in love with you," she'd said one evening, 6 months after that first meeting. They were on his apartment balcony while Abby slept inside, the city lights twinkling below them like earthbound stars. "Claire," Ethan had started, but she'd pressed a finger to his lips. "I know it's complicated. I'm your boss. You're still grieving Rachel. We both have baggage. But Ethan, when I found you, I thought I was just repaying a debt. I didn't expect this. I didn't expect to fall in love with your strength, your kindness, the way you are with Abby. I didn't expect to want to be part of your life. You already are.
he'd said simply. You and Eleanor both. You're already family. They'd kiss then, soft and certain, like a promise of things to come.
A year after that terrible, wonderful Tuesday morning, Ethan stood in his office looking at a framed photo on his desk. It was from Abby's 9th birthday party the week before. Her laughing with frosting on her nose, Claire hugging her from behind, Eleanor wearing a party hat at a jaunty angle, and Ethan watching them all with an expression of wonder he didn't remember making. His phone buzzed with a text from Claire. Dinner at Mom's tonight. She's making that lasagna you love. Abby already confirmed she's free. Smiley face. Ethan typed back, "Our social secretary strikes again." 3 dots appeared. Then, "I love you. See you at 6. Love you too." And he did. It was different from what he'd had with Rachel. Not better or worse, just different. Rachel had been young love, building something from nothing. Dreams and plans and first times. Claire was mature love, built on understanding and shared loss and second chances. Both were real. Both were gifts. That evening, as Ethan drove to Eleanor's house with Abby chattering excitedly in the back seat about her science project, he thought about that morning a year ago. The morning he'd had 27 minutes to make his interview. The morning he'd chosen a stranger's life over his own future. Except it hadn't been over his future at all. It had been the path to it. If he'd made that interview, he'd probably have gotten the coordinator job. He'd be making decent money, living a decent life. He'd never have met Claire as anything more than a name on the company directory. Eleanor would have been a stranger who died on a sidewalk while people filmed. Instead, he'd run 3 blocks in uncomfortable dress shoes with a dying woman on his back. He'd missed his interview, faced eviction, nearly lost everything. And in losing everything, he'd gained more than he'd ever dreamed possible. A job that fulfilled him, a daughter that thrived, a woman who loved him, a mother figure who doted on Abby, a family rebuilt from the ashes of tragedy.
"Dad?" Abby said from the front seat. "Yeah, sweetheart? I'm glad you saved Eleanor that day." "Me too. Even though you missed your interview?" Ethan glanced at her. "Especially because I missed my interview." "That doesn't make sense," she said with 8-year-old logic. "Someday it will," he promised. "Someday you'll understand that the worst moments of our lives can become the best things that ever happened to us. That losing one thing can mean finding something better. Like how we lost Mom but found Claire and Eleanor?" Ethan's throat tightened. "Yeah, baby. Exactly like that." "I think Mom would like them," Abby said quietly. "I think so too." They pulled up to Eleanor's house, a beautiful Victorian in the historic district, with gardens that Claire tended on weekends. Through the windows, Ethan could see Eleanor and Claire in the kitchen, laughing about something, their faces lit with warmth. This was his life now. This unlikely, impossible, beautiful life born from a moment of choice on a Tuesday morning when everything seemed lost. "Ready?" he asked Abby. "Ready," she said, already unbuckling her seatbelt. They walked up the path together, father and daughter, toward the light and laughter waiting inside, toward their family, toward home. If this story touched your heart, if you believe in second chances and the power of choosing humanity over opportunity, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Because sometimes the very thing we think is destroying our future is actually the key to a life we never dared to dream of.
Sometimes running 3 blocks in dress shoes to save a stranger is exactly how you save yourself. Sometimes the interviews we miss are the ones we were never meant to make. And sometimes, just sometimes, the universe has a plan far better than anything we could have written for ourselves. Eleanor opened the door before they could knock, pulling Abby into a hug. "There's my favorite artist. Come see what I bought for your project." Claire appeared behind her mother, meeting Ethan's eyes with that soft smile that still made his heart skip. "Hey," she said simply. "Hey," he replied. And in that single word was everything. Gratitude, love, the miracle of finding light after darkness. As he stepped into the house, into the warmth and chaos of this unexpected family, Ethan sent up a silent thank you to whatever force had put him on that sidewalk at that moment, to whatever twist of fate had made him choose humanity over opportunity. Because this messy, beautiful, impossible life, this was what he'd been running toward all along. He just hadn't known it until he'd carried a stranger 3 blocks to safety and lost everything that had been holding him back from everything he was meant to find. Friends, if this story touched your heart the way it touched mine, if it reminded you of the power we all have to change someone's life with a simple act of kindness, please don't just watch and walk away. Hit that subscribe button and join our Everbell Stories family.